Welcome on to an awesome night of NBA Cup action. Danny and I did a lot of it live earlier today. That meant we took absolutely no notes. So we're going to do our best to actually remember what happened now 2.5 hours after the fact or so. But certainly doesn't take much to recall how awesome that Orlando-Detroit game was.
I love the stakes of the last day of the NBA Cup because you have to the sands are shifting, but for a lot of the teams, it's actually more simple, which is just win or ideally win by as many points as you can. And Orlando, Detroit, particularly after Detroit's loss to the Celtics on Wednesday, were good. Was for Orlando was probably, and they eventually would have been in if they had lost, but number one seed if they win. And for Detroit, it's the spot in the quarterfinals of the NBA Cup. And so both teams played incredibly hard. And this was a really, really physical game. I mean, it was incredible, facilitated in part by the refs letting a lot of things go. There was a lot of contact around the basket that was not whistled for foul. Even so, there were a combined 63 free throw attempts in this game, and not a lot of that was like late fouling stuff. That's just not the way this game went. And so for me, the physicality of a lot of the players, that was the thing that stuck out the most to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are two extremely physical teams. And Detroit, it seemed like they were going to be dominating this game in the possession game early. They were getting a ton of offensive rebounds at the first time out of the first quarter. They had 70% offensive rebounds. However, in the end, they had 18 offensive rebounds. The Magic had 19, which would prove very important on the end, as we'll talk about. And then the big thing was the Magic in a game when neither team shot it particularly well, and the Magic had quite a reversion, 5 of 30 from 3-point range, and still won this one because they had 109 true shots to 98 for the Pistons, and that was due to 24 Detroit turnovers. It really was just a total throwback for the Magic to everything about last year when they were number 2 in turnover rate as well. They had 15 steals. In this one, I thought Jalen Suggs had one of the best 4 of 17 games for negative 20 that you're ever going to see, frankly. He had 4 steals. He was awesome offensively. Awesome defensively. Also played, I would almost certain, a season high 34 minutes as the Magic were really going for this one to get the number 1 overall seed. And Cade Cunningham is a very physical player going against them. Jalen Duren, also, who played 31 minutes in this one, didn't do as much offensively, but he was plus 22. Isaiah Stewart, Ron Holland, all these guys on Detroit. And then, guys like Wendell Carter Jr., Franz Wagner, Desmond Bane, and then Anthony Black, who's continued to, what I think has been a really impressive resurgence. Probably where we need to begin, though, is Desmond Bane's best game in a Magic uniform.
37 points, none of it coming from beyond the arc. He was 0 for 5 from 3, but was 13 of 20 from 2 and added in 11 to 12 from the free throw line. 2 assists, only 2 turnovers. And it was a lot of Desmond Bane getting downhill. And it wasn't always, sometimes it was getting fouled, some contested finishing, but he did a great job of that. He also, he only had 2 assists, but one of them was phenomenal where he just fired it across the court. I believe that was to Anthony Black for a 3. And so Bane, you can't say it's the full proof of concept because he didn't actually make any 3-pointers in the game, but he provided a different element. And Orlando's offense, I think the ball has pinged around better in certain ways without Paolo Banchero out there. I mean, he's a wonderful player, but he changes the offense in certain ways. And I thought that was a part of why Bane had such a important and big game.
Yeah, and he managed to take 22 pointers, was 13 of 20. Our stats have him only with 4 plays in transition, in which he had 8 points. But it really was him getting back to the way he played in Memphis. And he's been doing that, I think, the last 2-3 weeks, just through transition and just quick attacks, quick movement of the ball. And if there's no one in front of him, he's just going to go really fast towards the basket. And that could be quite powerful. It wasn't him going one-on-one necessarily. He did have a few awesome finishes around the basket, getting to that right hand and being physical, carving out space on his way to the rim. But it really was just the opportunism of his attacks. I'm sure Detroit felt like they were there, and then Bane would just attack way faster, even though there might have appeared to be guys in front of him. Suddenly he's getting past those guys, causing a ton of problems for the defense.
And speaking of causing a ton of problems for the defense, Detroit competed really hard defensively. I think that this game, coupled to an extent, you don't want to say the sky is falling for the Detroit Pistons. These two losses have pushed them all the way to 15-4 on the season. But Duncan Robinson, we talked a lot before the season about Duncan Robinson not being Malik Beasley, and I think we focused a lot of that on the offensive end. And Malik Beasley had this ludicrously effective high volume season from three. And Malik Beasley, despite his rep coming in from Florida State and early in his career with the Nuggets, being at least a credible defender at times, and maybe a little bit better than that, Duncan Robinson was a sore point that the Magic picked at pretty consistently in this game, and it got to the point where you're wondering, how is JP Bickerstaff going to deal with this? Because the unfortunate thing for the Pistons is that they desperately need Duncan Robinson shooting on the floor. And I mean, he played 35 minutes in this game. They don't really have that many alternatives, but it did give the Magic a place to go. And I'm not going to say Duncan Robinson is necessarily the reason that Detroit lost the game, but he does make it easier for the Pistons opponents tactically.
Yeah, I think that's true because there's a place for them to go. Now, I didn't think he was the end of the world in this one defensively. Like, there are moments where it's just so frustrating, right? Where he just fouls needlessly. I thought he actually had a few good moments denying off the ball, trying to keep guys on the side and pick and roll as well. It's really more an isolation in the middle of the floor or on the wing where he's probably going to pick up a foul trying to guard someone like Franz Wagner. What's frustrating about him generally is just that he doesn't really find a way to even slow the guy down without fouling and let the help be there for him. He's not even giving the help a chance. It's either just a straight blow by or he's fouling. But certainly for a team like the Magic, they were able to go after him some. And when he would get involved in action, then Detroit has to find a way to deal with that. But as you noted, they need him out there on the offensive end because they just don't have a ton of diversity in their offense. And that was particularly the case against this Magic team. The Magic, Jonathan Isaac was back from a back spasms absence. He was looking pretty decent out there. Wendell Carter Jr. was excellent switching. And so that took away a lot of what Cade Cunningham wanted to do. And the Pistons don't want Cade to have to go one-on-one every single time. So the other thing that you try to do is maybe get a switch with someone like Bane onto Cade Cunningham and do that with Duncan Robinson setting a screen, slipping out in a pick and pop, causing some confusion. So you don't necessarily have to bring someone like Wendell Carter Jr. into the action. So Robinson is just very required. They don't have another good shooter. And I didn't think it was as palpable as in the Boston game where Boston is just going to pick at whatever the scab is more mercilessly probably than any team. But it's still something that's raised my eyebrows these last two games, both of which Detroit obviously could have won.
One of the other ways that the Magic defense was disruptive for the Pistons, you brought up how they were going after what they were doing against Cade Cunningham, was Jalen Duren. One of the big threads of this Piston season is that he's taken on a larger role within the offense. He's been an effective scorer. He played 31 minutes, only had 8 field goal attempts and 6 free throws. So if we want to call it 11 shooting possessions, he had 2 assists and 5 turnovers. And then his counterpart, Isaiah Stewart, had only 3 shots, 1 assist, 3 turnovers. And so the Pistons, that's been a strength for them against almost everybody else. But when the other team is playing Wendell Carter and Goga Bitadze and bringing help and some of the other things that the Magic are doing, it neutralized the Pistons, let's call it their second best offensive player.
Yeah, and we didn't see nearly as many of those face-up drives from Duren as we've seen in his best games. He did have 4 blocks, but I thought overall the Pistons' rim protection, you remember very early in the season, the Pistons were allowing like 55% shooting at the rim. That was not the case in this one. Bane, in particular, was awesome getting to the basket. He was 7 of 7 at the rim inside of 5 feet. And then Desmond Bane also was 5 of 8 from floaters, and he had 3 and 1s going to the basket too. Mm-hmm. So that was really disappointing for Detroit against this Magic team that has been really good in transition, is going to just continue trying to get to the basket, that they couldn't control that. Because if they could have controlled that a little bit more and controlled their own defensive glass a little bit more, they could potentially have won this game pretty easily. But even though the Magic were struggling on all jumpers, not just threes, they were 4 of 12 on mid-rangers, but they managed to get up 55 shots in the paint. And that was really a big part of what won the Magic this game. So Detroit, struggled some from a rim protection standpoint. Cade Cunningham was still really good. 39 points, plus 16, 11 assists. But he was plus 16 in a game they ended up losing by 3. What happened in the other 8 minutes that he was not on the floor?
They did not go well. And in the first half, you and I stuck out that it was basically the original intention by JB Bickerstaff was to use, it was in the end of the first quarter, because Cade came out before the first quarter was over, was to use Jaden Ivey and just Jaden Ivey as the backup point guard. And those minutes in the first half were an absolute disaster. And it wasn't just Jaden Ivey's fault. It was that they got completely trucked. They didn't have a good offensive identity, but also they had that ended up being one of their worst defensive stretches. And so they were really outscored there. And so we wondered,
because let's keep in mind there, Detroit was way up early. They were up by 13, and then they gave up a 21-6 run to close the first. And that was in the 4 minutes and 9 seconds that Jaden Ivey was on the floor without Cade Cunningham, and he ended up negative 15 in those minutes. Now, was it Jaden Ivey's fault that the Magic scored 21 points in those 4 minutes? Not entirely. He had a couple of foibles, but he is the point guard, and they only scored 6 points in 4 minutes. So I don't know that I would say I would put it all on Jaden Ivey. I thought Ivey was bad in the Celtic thing. I wouldn't say that was the case here. Would Dennis Jenkins as the point guard have made things any better? I'm not sure, but I think Dennis Jenkins at least was proved to be a better distributor than Ivey. They tried playing them together a little bit at the start of the second. Go ahead, sorry.
They played them a little bit together at the start of the second, but what I thought was really fascinating was that, so there were only 3 stretches in this game that Cade Cunningham sat. The first one was only Jaden Ivey as like the lead distributor. That went really poorly. The second one was Cade had a short sit in the middle of the second quarter. Jenkins was the sole distributor there. I believe Jaden Ivey was he had come off. He didn't come back in the second quarter after having a rough first quarter. Then Cade comes out at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and neither Jenkins nor Ivey is out. Ivey's out there for the very beginning of it, and then they ran some stuff through Karis LeVert, who had a nice stretch around that time, and LeVert played a really long. He played like basically most of the third, and then the beginning of the fourth. And so it does seem like JB Bickerstaff is looking for answers, and I think that Jenkins is a better answer in this role than Jaden Ivey is. I still think there's a place for Jaden Ivey on this team and in this rotation, but he's not. But
that place is not coming back from injury, having not played basically in almost a year, right into NBA Cup games that they're trying to win. That to me is like they should have tried to baby him a little bit more, I would say. Maybe play him just with Cade. They had some great stuff going with Jenkins. I agree. They got to get Ivey back into things, but I think that maybe they just weren't taking the NBA Cup that seriously. It's just another game, fine. But I to me, just save it for some games against some bad teams when it doesn't matter as much. Not the Celtics and the Magic in these last 2.
Another player that I think was important for this game, and this kind of can tie in with the ending, was Anthony Black. And we wondered throughout. I mean, Anthony Black has been on this hot run. We will break that down over the course of the season. Hopefully it continues. And he had some big moments in this one. He only hit 1 3, but it was a big above the break 3. And he had a nice dunk, but he was at least partially earned plus 27. Part of that was being on the floor with some of those rougher Pistons units. And so what we wondered about throughout the course of the game was, how is Jamal Mosley going to handle this? Because Anthony Black has been one of their 5 best players throughout this game, but so has Desmond Bane, so has Jalen Suggs. And so towards the end, what he went to was their their 5 best players. It was Bane at the 3, if we're counting it that way, Suggs, Black, and then Franz Wagner and Wendell Carter. And I thought that group looked really good together. They're not going to work necessarily against every opponent, but they're so disruptive defensively.
Yeah, both Suggs and even now Black, probably since he's getting stronger, are capable of playing at a much bigger or guarding much bigger players than you would expect. They went with Suggs on Cade down the end, although it was more Franz Wagner early who had that assignment, and then Black when he was in. I think they were kind of saving Suggs and potential fouls for the end there. In the end, Suggs only did have 1 foul. And they even, Wendell Carter Jr. was in foul trouble too, so they were able to go at Batadze in the middle of the fourth quarter. But then, yeah, that group was really good. They were able to switch. They don't really have any pigeons to attack. I still think it probably makes sense to start De Silva rather than Black because Suggs usually isn't going to play as many minutes. They need to stagger him and Black. And then also De Silva is still the same position as Paolo Banchero. When Paolo comes back, he'll be the starter. But it's really important to get one more really good rotation guy with this group, and then also being able to put De Silva back in the second unit, so where he's more comfortable. So De Silva, Black, maybe Jonathan Isaac, Batadze. We worried some about this Magic depth, but if Black is going to be good like this, and he was 1 of 4 from 3, but it's still the 3 ball is looking good for him, and he's been a defensive difference maker these last 2 weeks as well. So even though Tyus Jones is doing absolutely nothing, honestly, they don't even necessarily need him if Black is going to play like this. And then you could also be staggering Franz and Paolo when he comes back. So getting Jones out of the rotation, then you're back to this theory of the Magic team where they have 48 minutes at every position of guys that you're not going to be able to really attack one-on-one. And that can get them back to that island basketball philosophy. And I'm really excited about what that could look like defensively for them when Paolo gets back.
So something I wanted to look up, and I believe Clean the Glass has not included Friday night's games yet. But so the Magic have played 56 possessions with I'm just doing the splits with Black, Bane, and Jalen Suggs on the floor together. Again, 56 possessions, small sample size. Plus 48 net rating, 153.6 on offense, 105.6 on defense. And the defensive part, they're forcing 22% opponent turnovers. That, I think, maybe not 22% is unsustainable, but forcing a lot of turnovers. They've been surprisingly, again, small sample, good on the defensive rebounding front. But that idea, and we haven't seen any of that with Paolo. We've only seen like a couple possessions of that with Paolo on the floor. They actually played Paolo and Franz as the other 2, which is something compelling. But I think with how well Anthony Black is playing, it's a nice lever to be able to pull, particularly against a team that has a limited number of creators, because then you can just suffocate them and probably get enough transition offense to keep yourself. I don't think they're going to have a 153 offense against everybody, but I really like that trio to close this game.
Let's turn it back to Detroit now, and I want to pick up on something you were saying earlier, JB Bickerstaff. I don't want to say he's searching necessarily, and I don't even want to say that he doesn't have great options, but I think the return of Ivy, the emergence of Dennis Jenkins, Javonte Green playing well also. They still want to get Ron Holland into the mix. Paul Reed also has played extremely well when he's had a chance. Because remember, they won a bunch of those games when both Duran and Cunningham were out for about a week or so. And Tobias Harris also missed a bunch of time as well with that ankle sprain. So all those guys came back at the same time. And now they have basically, and how many guys did they play in this game? They played 12 guys in this game for 5 minutes or more. So they really kind of have too many guys. And I don't fault Bickerstaff for, I think maybe he should have played it more conservative and gone with the guys who've been good these last 2-3 weeks more just in this stretch. But in the long term, he's going to have to figure out who he really trusts. And LeVert also missed some time. He's been reintegrated now too, but he's been getting the close the last couple of games. JB knows him from Cleveland, trusts him to make shots, also gives them another ball handler, although he hasn't really been particularly dynamic in that role of late. But if you have to cull some guys out of this rotation for JB, because I mean, another thing too, Asar Thompson only played 23 minutes in this one.
He had some foul trouble, but yeah,
he did. That happens to him a lot. And then I mean, I think this is something that Bryce Simon and Mari Sankofa have been saying is, as many guys as the Pistons have, Duncan Robinson is probably their second least replaceable player, because he's the only guy who does what he does. They have basically copies of everyone at every other position, with a few different strengths and weaknesses. But if you're going to take some guys out of this rotation, which is going to have to happen at some point, who would be your candidates?
It's not an easy decision because, like, I mean, for example, I love Asar. Asar Thompson is so good defensively that he's definitely going to be in my rotation. And so you're right. I would probably do, maybe it's not, you have to have Duncan Robinson out there, but maybe like he played 35 minutes in this game, maybe tone that down, as long as you have Tobias Harris available too. And It's hard because like LeVert, I would like for Ivy to be playing so well that he replaces LeVert, like that you can use basically a combination of Ivy and Jenkins as your additional creators, and then Karis LeVert kind of fills some gaps. I think Javonte Green, as well, as important as he's been during parts of this run, like I think Green, and I know that Bickerstaff, it seems like Bickerstaff really trusts him, and he made some nice defensive plays.
Yeah, I thought he was important in raising their effort level in the second to match the Magic's intensity. The Magic fast break, forcing turnovers, that was really key for them to go on that 21-6 run with Cade out of the game. And they had to keep Cade on the bench for a little bit without just totally blowing through any kind of a reasonable number of minutes for him. And so getting Jenkins back in, and then also I think having Green in was, those guys were still in the negative, but they were at least able to match the intensity. But, Green and Jenkins are the guys with the least pedigree here, right? So it would seem like one of those or both of those guys are going to be first in the chopping block.
What about for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would like it to be Ivy. Now, there are going to be more injuries, too. Ron Holland, I mean, to me, he's more important for their future than Ivy is. And so if you're going to give anyone entitlement minutes, it would be Holland, particularly because he fits into their identity, I think, a little bit more than Ivy. Paul Reed, I think you can break glass in case of emergency on him, or he fits in pretty easily for Stewart and for Duren. So if you want to get him a couple more minutes, like, it doesn't really change what you're doing that much. So I think, though, Reed is a pretty easy cut. LeVert, it's, I don't know. I don't really, he's just kind of he's not particularly weak in any one area, but he's also not particularly strong in any one area either. But it's also just in this day when everybody is pressuring, they need someone else to bring the ball up, which if Thompson is not going to close, then that probably needs to be LeVert. Yeah, he's going to have to work it out. And Harris, I would like to say, all right, move on for him. Well, he had 18 points. He was plus 15 in this game. And he's also another one of the guys who, he's the only other guy on this team who can score from mid-range. And he's also really the only other credible shooter that they have as an off-ball guy. So they kind of need him, even if he's not maybe the greatest player.
And on that vein, we got asked during the playback that we did about basically like the Pistons and moving into a higher level as contender. And what I didn't answer it during the pod or during the live show, but what I was thinking about was the problem for the Pistons is, so first of all, one easy thing is say, they should do a consolidation trade. Those don't really actually happen unless they're willing to give up assets to do it in addition to those. Yeah. And the other problem is that what they're looking for are upgrades in similar roles to the players that are less replaceable. So you want a better Duncan Robinson, but a better Duncan Robinson is likely, it means is a more balanced, like a better defender, and ideally similarly good shooter or even better. And then for Tobias Harris, it'd honestly be a similar thing. And so, but that's a really hard player to find. And so you can try to have all the assets you have, try to be willing to throw some stuff in, but it's harder, not impossible. And with Cade and Duren taking the steps forward they have more latitude. They're moving into a different conversation. But to get from where they are to where they'd like to be with beyond the internal improvement, those steps are going to be really hard personnel-wise.
Yeah, and maybe it needs to wait until the offseason, and this will, as good as they are, still is going to be a little bit of a season of discovery to see who's really coming along with this next iteration of the team. And also, the other big variable is how much money is Jalen Duren going to be making? Is he going to get a max offer sheet? Are they going to have to pay him the max going forward? Well, that's really going to affect things. Then maybe you can't afford to trade for Lauri Markkanen and a third max player, and you do have to build with better contracts, prioritizing that going forward. So let's pick it up mid-fourth. Suggs makes one of the Magic's 5 3-pointers to push it to a 190 with 6:25 left. Then the Pistons roared back, tied it at 100 over a 2-minute period. We did not watch that part because we were on Cavs Hawks at the time because it seemed like this was a double-digit game. But Pistons come back and tie it at 100 with 4 minutes remaining. And then it really was just back and forth from that point. And Detroit was actually able to take a lead on a Cade drive, but Cade had a couple of misses around the basket. He had a turnover, and Desmond Bane had probably the biggest shot of the game to put Orlando up 108-106 on a beautiful layup and one on Jalen Duren. Again, just some of this rugged finishing by Bane. I said his finishing numbers earlier. And Franz Wagner also had a really nice layup. It wasn't quite in transition, but it was still a quick action. Harris made a 3 coming back to get the Pistons within 1. But then probably another huge thing was Cade Cunningham driving off a turnover. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This is a Suggs miss. Cunningham got the defensive rebound. He's sprinting up the floor. Desmond Bane runs him down from behind, knocks it away as Cade's going into a shooting motion, and gets it knocked off of his thigh. It's it's Pistons ball. Jamal Mosley goes for the challenge because it's Desmond Bane told him to. It's off the thigh of Cade. Ruling overturned. And then after that was one of the most ridiculous possessions we've seen in a long time.
The Orlando Magic win the challenge. They get the ball back at 104. The Detroit Pistons do not possess the ball again until 6.3 seconds are left on the clock because Franz Wagner misses 3 jump shots that are all offensive rebounded by the Magic. The first 2 by Desmond Bane, the third one by Wendell Carter Jr. And so it's not a dagger offensive rebound. It's just like a series of daggery cuts, and then but those together, and then the compounding with eventually they have to foul. Jalen Suggs hits both those free throws, and so it was only a 1-point game with a minute to go, and the Magic had the ball, but they were able to, not deliberately, they just hustled. They got some loose balls, and they were able to run the clock basically all the way down.
Well, it was remarkable because the same thing kept happening. Franz Wagner ended up getting the ball on the right wing, having to shoot a difficult shot for a 3, and then each time the ball bounced way away from the rim, and Desmond Bane got both of those offensive rebounds like 15 to 20 feet from the basket. Finally, Wendell Carter got his shot blocked with 16 seconds left, but the Magic got the offensive rebound. After that, Franz had to take a really difficult fadeaway with the shot clock done. Carter then got another offensive rebound. This is another one that bounced way out again, and then the Pistons had no choice but to foul. Jalen Suggs made 2 ice free throws, and then, of course, it was the Detroit Pistons down 3, trying to get a shot off before they could get fouled again, in just the most amazing theater that the NBA has ever given us of whether Cade Cunningham can go into a shooting motion before an intentional foul occurs.
But you say that, and you're right, but Cade Cunningham did give us one of the most successful missed free throws, other than the eventual result, that I've ever seen, where he deliberately, you and I were discussing about whether he missed the first free throw, and so they're still down 3, and it's whether you intentionally miss it. And you and I disagreed. I said he should intentionally miss it. You said no. But I think you would have agreed if you had known how well it was going to miss. He hit it off the rim so hard but directly back to him that he was able to almost create a wide open three, except for the incredible reaction time of Anthony Black.
Yeah, it was really a shame that Cade missed the first free throw, because then he could have just gone right back up with it, with them not needing a three. This one's when he intentionally misses it. Again, I think he should have just made it, and they should have tried to play the foul game again, because they had a timeout left still at that point with 4.7 left, and just see if they could get the Magic to screw it up. But if Cade knew he had that in his pocket, it was awesome. I mean, he basically just threw a chest pass off the front of the rim, banged it right back to himself before anyone could get there. And that's really works well, because the way that NBA box outs are set up, someone has to come in from the 3-point line to get in front of it. That's his job, to box out. And Cade made it hit the rim so fast that then once it hits the rim, he can then step over. But there's nobody who's just stepping directly in front of him, because that guy's job is to pinch down instead, the guy who's closest to him. Mm-hmm. And so he gets it. Duncan Robinson moves to his left. They clearly had set that play up in advance. And Anthony Black, who you would have thought his job would have been to step inside, maybe try to get a rebound, the fact that he reacted so quickly to know that they're going to go right to Duncan Robinson, right to a three. He knew exactly what it was that Detroit needed. He didn't get sucked into the lane. It's just incredible mental awareness by him, and he blocks Duncan Robinson's three-pointer.
And so that seals the Orlando Magic victory. And because of their superior point differential, that meant that the Orlando Magic get the number 1 seed in the East quarterfinals over the Toronto Raptors, who had already locked in their 4-0 record. They just had a little bit of a worse differential. And so 2 teams in the East go undefeated in group stage. Magic have the better differential, so they host the wildcard team, which we will discuss shortly.
And it was great news for all of the teams trying to get in to the wild card that the Magic, who would have had the best point differential had they lost a close one to the Pistons, were then grandfathered through by virtue of winning the group. The Pistons were out of it because they then had 2 losses. Their point differential didn't matter. So that left 4 teams vying for 2 slots remaining. 3 teams in East Group C, the Knicks, Heat, and Bucks. And then the Cavs were also a possibility at 2-1. They had the best point differential other than Miami of those teams coming in. And if they could have beaten the Atlanta Hawks pretty decisively, then they would have been in a possibility for the wild card. Or had Milwaukee beaten Miami, then Miami would have won the group. Their plus 49 would have been out of there. And then it would have been the best point differential between Milwaukee and Cleveland. However, the Cleveland Cavaliers just never got going as in that analysis because they lost to the Atlanta Hawks. They were in it late, but then the Hawks just put them away down the stretch.
The Cavs had their guys, at least their available guys, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, all played 28 or more minutes. Garland played 33. And I thought that overall, having Garland on the floor made a big difference for the Cavs. We watched a fair amount of this game because we thought it was going to. The funny thing is that the Cavs losing ended up not mattering, just in the way things shook out, but we didn't know it in the moment. And Garland, his ability to get into the paint really opened up a lot of things for the Cavaliers.
Well, it did end up mattering because if they could have won by enough to have a higher point differential in the Heat, it would have mattered. But yeah, by the time it was close down the end, it was clear that they weren't going to surpass Miami. But they still, if the Bucks had won, then it would have been fine. Yeah,
they had the chance. I guess that's a good way to put it. But for me, so Darius Garland, having him back helped the Cavs generate good looks. And Garland, he's still working his way. He's not perfect. He had 10 assists in 33 minutes, but. And that also prevented Donovan Mitchell from overindulging at certain moments in time. But then down the end, the Hawks were able to just short circuit a lot of the stuff that the Cavs were running with Darius Garland, in part because they just have a lot of long defenders. This is a really wonderful defensive group without Trae Young on the floor. And so I thought that and a couple of Cavs mistakes, like that really was an important part of the story.
Yeah, and Garland, I thought, looked good overall. I think it's his second game back now from this absence with the toe, or new renewed absence with the toe that he had. And so I think the most important thing was that he looked pretty good physically. He's been out for a while, but there were moments when it looked like the old Cavs offense, which it really hasn't for nearly the entire season, where Garland is getting into the lane, setting up 3-point shooters, where they don't want him to shoot the three off the dribble, and so they're getting two up there, and then he's making the quick pass to the pocket. Someone's coming over, they're firing up a corner three or getting a cutter along the baseline for a dunk. There are a lot of those possessions, particularly with Garland on the floor, and particularly in the first half. So that was encouraging for Cleveland, but I thought the way the Hawks defended was awesome. And what they ended up doing was just not being quite as aggressive with the big on Garland. And because the Cavs had the two bigs on the floor, the spacing was a little bit more compacted. And so there were just a bunch of misses by the Cavs. There was one pick and pop three by Mobley assisted by Garland. It was interesting that a lot of the action was actually Garland and Mobley. Usually it's Garland and Allen, and Mitchell and Mobley. Those guys are paired with each other. And so here they just were using the defender is either Alexander Walker or it was Dyson Daniels on Darius Garland, getting over the screen, sticking with him, and then also sloughing into the paint a little bit, not as worried about Evan Mobley as a pop man. And then if he rolled down the lane, they were able to just create enough traffic that it was too difficult. Garland got forced into a travel. Then Donovan Mitchell, I thought, tried to go a little bit too much into hero mode and took a pretty bad two with his heels on the 3-point line. So they had a stretch where they just could not score other than that pick and pop three. Mobley had an offensive foul. Hunter missed a layup that was pressured. Then Garland had a travel, or sorry, had a bad pass. Mitchell missed that shot I talked about. Garland had another turnover as a travel. And so during that period, that's when the Hawks were really able to seize control until Donovan Mitchell made a couple of ridiculous plays to tie it at 123. And that's when the Hawks took over offensively.
And one of the big mistakes that happened to facilitate that Hawks run at the end was another Donovan Mitchell mistake. You know, he had a very good game overall. He had 42 points on 15-28 from the field. But what he did on this play was he was on the left corner, and he just left his man to go towards the lane. I call this helping without helping, because he didn't actually impact the drive at all. He just conceded a wide open corner three, which I believe that was the Ricochet one, which put the Hawks up 3.
Yeah. And it was Evan Mobley, the defensive player of the year, who had the drive pretty contained. Who assisted that? Yeah, it was Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson was brilliant in this game, but I think you got to just trust Evan Mobley to make that play and not help off the strong side corner. That's what Mitchell kind of did, but he didn't really. And then, just a Ricochet wide open, big shot for him. And then the next time, and this was actually, that was a key sequence, because first on that possession, Nickeil Alexander-Walker was fouled by Darius Garland, which is the second time Darius Garland had fouled Nickeil Alexander-Walker as a 3-point shooter. However, the challenge was overturned. They said that it was not that contact that they're emphasizing this year with the swipe through the hand. I guess it was more of a normal challenge. So then it's a jump ball, but Okongwu won it, and then that's what set up that Ricochet three.
And then if memory serves, Mitchell took a pretty aggressive 3-point shot going the other way. And so and that missed. And so once then the Hawks had the ball up 3 with 52 seconds to go, and you're in that circumstance where if you can get something good, you're going to be in a really good position. They got something good, but they got something good fast. It was really, I brought up the aggressiveness of Donovan Mitchell's shot. Nickeil Alexander-Walker got an open 3, an arc 3, but he took it and he made it. So then the Hawks are up 6 without 49 seconds to go. And it's not over then, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, that shot was probably a bad shot, I would say. I think so. Mitchell misses that shot with 55 seconds left. You're up 3. Is it better to run the time down to 31 seconds, probably get a way worse shot than Alexander Walker had? Because Alexander Walker, that's basically a shot that can end the game, and he was wide open in transition. Jalen Johnson had a nice hit ahead pass to him. So I'd be interested to know exactly what the analytics would say about that. I would say you probably want to run the time down and still hope that you can get something so that Cleveland can't get a 2-for-1 coming back. But you're still in a pretty commanding position, because I think it's important when you're up by 3 to make sure that you don't give the other team 2 shots at it. Like, make them be forced to make a 3 to beat you or to foul you. I think that's very powerful. So I probably would have held on to it. What did you think of it?
I think that from my instinct on the math is that it's better to reduce the amount of time. And because the difference in the likelihood of the shot going in is significant, but it's not as significant as just decreasing the amount of time that the other team has to come back. But if you make it, so it's one of the things like you better make it is probably the phrasing that I would use there. And so, yes. And he did.
Yeah. Caleb Love had a shot like that too, which he actually missed that last Friday.
That's true.
Yeah.
While I'm thinking of it, two other significant things. One, just we have Jalen Johnson, 12 assists. So he had a triple-double, 29, 12, and 12. And I thought he played a wonderful game. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 30 points, 10 and 22 from the field. But Quinn Snyder had a different challenge, not a challenge the Hawks wanted when they built this roster, because Kristaps Porzingis was unavailable due to illness. And so it's like, well, how are they going to run the rest of the rotation? And Mohamed Gay was their backup center. And he also played some with Onyeka Okongwu. And so the way that Quinn Snyder handled it was he only played one big off their bench. It was Gay to fill both of those roles. The only other guys who played were Keaton Wallace as functionally like a depth guard, and then Vit Krejci and Luke Kennard. And so it was a smaller group, but the Cavs weren't really able to make them pay.
No, that's true. I think and the Cavs are not a team that's going to like dominate you on the boards or something. So I think it was a good way to go for Quinn. I mean, they don't have really a third pure center that you love anyway. Napoli Dante probably doesn't qualify there. Yeah, Alexander Walker was brilliant, and he's just had a lot of these games. 30 points for him. I mean, he's just been one of their highest usage players, and he's stepped in pretty well for Trae Young. We didn't think that was going to happen. Vit Krejci also has been really good for them, because they've gotten reasonable minutes out of Keaton Wallace too, as sort of a hybrid guard off their bench as well, playing with Krejci or maybe with Alexander Walker on the second unit. Dyson Daniels getting some point guard reps as well. So they've been able to do, and of course, Jalen Johnson is a good ball handler too. So they've really been able to do enough by committee to get by without Trae. I'm interested to see how he's going to fit back in when he returns. But we got asked about this on the broadcast, and I will say I was at least saying it at the time that I wasn't sure that the Wolves made the right decision prioritizing Naz Reid over Nickeil Alexander-Walker, even though Reid is a cultural institution in Minnesota, particularly given the size of the contracts that both of those gentlemen got. Or, they also could have just tried to retain Alexander Walker and maybe just figured it out later, getting good players on good contracts, and you can always trade them, but that would have been prohibitively expensive way into the second apron. But Alexander Walker has been awesome, and the Wolves have really missed him. Yeah, I think Jalen Johnson too. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say maybe some of these 3 Wolves late collapses wouldn't have happened if they still had Nickeil on the floor in those minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been better than DiVincenzo this year. I mean, that's the other thing they could have done too. They could have tried to retain Alexander Walker and trade DiVincenzo. Would I have said at the time that Alexander Walker is better than DiVincenzo? I think maybe I would have, because I don't think DiVincenzo is just good enough at guarding. Like, he's a better shooter than Alexander Walker, but I think Alexander Walker is better at just about everything else. So, and then Jalen Johnson was brilliant too. 39 minutes, 29 points, 12 assists, even had a good game because he had 12 rebounds, only had 3 turnovers. And I thought his passing was outstanding. Onyeka Okongwu continues to spread the floor. Like, the revelation of his shooting has been starting down the end of last season. And he's just been an awesome player. They're also able to do a lot of switching with him, although they did go away from that late, as I mentioned. I thought Dyson Daniels had a pretty good game. Again, didn't even take a three. A lot of what he's been doing is getting into the lane and then making plays out of that. He had 9 assists. It was frustrating to me that the Cavs didn't seem to know that he was going to always spin back over his left shoulder for a floater once he got into the lane. They finally seemed to figure that out at the end of the game. Daniels had 3 steals as well. So
Dyson Daniels has attempted 26 3-pointers in 20 games now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's not even standing out there anymore at this point, but he's also been adept at making passes in short areas. Like, I do think there's going to be a point at which it becomes a real problem for them, his lack of shooting. But also, if Okongwu can just stand out there and shoot threes, it makes it a lot easier for him to exist as well. Anything else you had on this one? I guess we can point to this too. 41 transition points on 32 plays for the Hawks. That's nowhere near good enough for the Cavaliers defense, but it also shows you, even without Trae Young, Daniels, Jalen Johnson, like these guys are just really good at grabbing and going. And it also helps when you get 11 steals. Let me see how that broke down actually for the Hawks. Yeah, they ran on 69% of Cleveland misses. That's not very good transition defense.
No.
So, Cleveland was out of it. And ultimately, what that meant by the end was that Milwaukee versus New York was for the last spots to get in. The loser would be out. If the Knicks lost, they would have 2 losses in the group. And obviously, so would Milwaukee. And it meant that Miami, who's already in the clubhouse with that plus 49 differential, was going to be in regardless.
But and so the Bucks needed a lot of things to break right to have a chance. It was either they needed a couple of teams to lose, which Cleveland did, or they needed to win and win by a lot. And
yeah, well, I mean, everything did break right for them, other than winning themselves.
Yeah,
right. And like Cleveland lost.
Yeah,
and so did Detroit, and so that was exactly what they needed to happen to give themselves to control their own destiny. But unfortunately, while controlling their own destiny, they weren't able to actually win the game.
And the Bucks, they outscored the Knicks by 2 points during the 28 minutes that Giannis Antetokounmpo played. They were outscored by 11 in the 20 minutes.
Well, we should start with that he did return from that groin injury. So it wasn't total bullshit maybe that he was questionable in the Miami game, but he was clearly on a minutes limit coming back.
And I thought he looked very good in the minutes that he played. I mean, the stats were there, but he was physically dominant. He was a big part of the Bucks transition attack. Milwaukee, 1.43 points per transition play. That is really good. 30 points on 21 transition plays. Giannis was at the forefront of a lot of that. They got some at the rim. They also hit a bunch of threes because the gravity, you can form a wall in a number of different ways and you're creating those opportunities. And so Giannis was an important part of it. He also had 8 assists in 28 minutes of action. So if he had played more, he probably would have gotten a triple-double. And he's a lot to deal with. And so Giannis, he's the rising tide that lifts all of their boats, makes life easier on AJ Green, makes life easier on Ryan Rollins. And like, we've seen that with some of the on-off stuff. And so for the Bucks, like, it's not to say like, I mean, like it's as simple as like, if he had played more, they would have won, but they're at their best when he's out there. And when he's not out there, they just don't have enough guys to generate advantages to make everything work.
Yeah. And that certainly was obvious, but really where it fell apart for Milwaukee was with Giannis on the floor at the very end of the game.
Right.
Because they were in this right at the end, and then Jalen Brunson was able to close for New York. Giannis really wasn't able to get very much. I thought Josh Hart turned up the intensity, and there were some key possessions where he prevented Giannis from getting the ball or getting to his spot to initiate the play that they wanted to run. And that became pretty difficult for Milwaukee to score. And then they just couldn't deal with Brunson. And so there was another very similar mistake against Josh Hart coming downhill as the one that Donovan Mitchell made in the other game, because they're putting 2 on the ball at Brunson. Kyle Kuzma actually had his best game of the season coming off the bench. He was the guy guarding Brunson at the end. He had 20 points, 8 of 9 from the field, 4 of 5 from 3, and also had 2 steals. They're going in pick and roll, Towns and Brunson pick and roll, which we have not seen all that much of down the end of games. Mike Brown went to that. In fact, he has taken Mitchell Robinson out of the starting lineup and gone with Karl-Anthony Towns back at center again, trying to get him going. And Towns wasn't particularly effective offensively, but he at least was useful as a screener, a pick and pop guy. They felt like they had to put 2 on the ball, or if they would put Turner on Josh Hart, then Hart would set the screen. He would get released to the basket off the double team and then made the play. And my point was, hey, you got Giannis Antetokounmpo back there. Yes, he's not quite the same defensive force he used to be, but Karl Towns under the basket. And so, yeah, excuse me, it actually was not that much of Towns involved in the pick and roll late because they didn't want to involve Giannis. They wanted to involve Turner, and Giannis was on Towns. But then Towns, maybe they could have tried to space Towns out a little bit more instead of having him under the basket. But Giannis is under the rim. Hart's coming down 2-on-1. He and Towns against Giannis. And then there was an overhelp. I think it was Ryan Rollins from the corner. Yeah. And who was it who hit that wide open corner 3? That was McBride who hit that corner 3. That was one of the biggest plays of the game. Then they actually did get a stop the next time, but were able to retain possession on an offensive rebound. And Brunson was able to get an and one also during that period as Milwaukee was really struggling to score.
This was an extremely low possession game. And it was 94 possessions basically. And the possession game loomed even larger because the Knicks offense had a 37.5% offensive rebound rate. They didn't turn the ball over a ton, one of the benefits of having Jalen Brunson. So the true shots was 98 to 83 in favor of the Knicks. That's a huge part of how you can withstand the other team going, by 18. They went 18 to 41 from 3. The Knicks weren't that much worse from 3, but the Bucks turned it over 15 times, 10 of which were live ball, and they gave up a ton of offensive rebounds.
Yeah, Doc Rivers talked about it, that it's a math problem after the game, which is a little surprising for me to hear him say because his teams generally have not forced a lot of turnovers or offensive rebounded. Now, part of that has been their personnel, although the Sixers, interestingly, as soon as they moved on from him, became a high turnover forcing team, which they weren't. Now, part of that is that Joel hasn't played as much for Nick Nurse as he did for Doc. And then Doc's teams usually have not offensive rebounded. We've talked about how their personnel is just, they're not going to get offensive rebounds. It's because they're spacing everything out for Giannis. And again, this is the evolution of the game right now where 5 out or 4 out around this great creator, like that is very powerful offensively. And yeah, on your first shot, half court offense, that's true, but you are giving some things up. The other problem is they don't get back on defense as well. They didn't control their own defensive glass. But yeah, like this Bucks team is just going to get slaughtered in those areas. They have bad personnel for it. And they also have a coach who historically hasn't managed to excel in those areas either. And that is a much more important part of the game than it was back during the period when Doc was coaching, say, the Clippers.
Do you have anything more on this game? I think I'm pretty much spent.
Yeah, I do. This is pretty fascinating. We didn't get a chance to watch it, so this is a little bit of box score watching, but at least we have a good box score to look at. Karl-Anthony Towns and Mitchell Robinson both on the floor, 14 possessions. Knicks outscored 17-4. And Brunson was actually on the floor for about half of that as well. So maybe this is, and then the Knicks starters actually played 18 minutes together, and they were in the positive by 4. Josh Hart, I think that Mike Brown was right that he's just a really important player against this Bucks team. He can be more effective because the Bucks just don't really have like hustle players on their team. Shall we turn to the Western Conference?
Well, we could just, before we leave, we can walk through what actually ended up the eventual result, which was that the Orlando Magic are the number 1 seed in the East. The Toronto Raptors are the number 2. The Knicks are the number 3 and the Heat are the number 4. So it will be Heat at Magic, Knicks at Raptors in the lawsuit bowl for in the quarterfinals. And this will be significant. I'll talk about this a lot more in the West, that it isn't a quick turnaround. The quarterfinals are it's December 6th, I believe. So we have a little bit of time. Might even be later than that.
Yeah, it's not till Tuesday of next week.
Tuesday, December 9th.
Next week.
December 9th.
Yeah, sorry, not next week, the week after next. Yeah.
And that will become more significant potentially for one of the Western Conference teams that made it through. And yeah, we can go to that game. So there were only 2 West games that really mattered. There were others that could, in unlikely scenarios, that didn't end up occurring. And that was 2 games where it was win and you're in, and then one of them was lose and you're probably in. And so I think the more compelling one to start with is Spurs Nuggets. And San Antonio, they stayed alive with that win over the Portland Trail Blazers. You and I were happy about it because that gave the Denver Nuggets life because of the circumstance with the tiebreakers. And so it's like, okay, Denver, if all they have to do is beat San Antonio at home without Victor Wembanyama, without Stephon Castle to make it happen. And they did not. The San Antonio Spurs 139, the Denver Nuggets 136 to come away with the win and the winning group, West Group C, the group of death.
Yeah, really disappointing for me, honestly, because the Denver Nuggets have never made it into the knockout rounds in all 3 years of the NBA Cup, despite Nikola Jokic being a really good player. And I would love to see him in this. Denver had this at home playing against San Antonio without Victor Wembanyama. And yeah, Denver doesn't have Christian Brown. They don't have Aaron Gordon, but they were up by 18 very early in the third quarter. Looked like they were going to roll away with that. They still were up by 10 late in the third. And then a barrage of San Antonio threes got them back into it. Then it was neck and neck down the end. But really, I thought Denver's defense was just nowhere near good enough in this game. They gave up a lot of transition. Their closeouts were pretty poor as well. Their zone stuff wasn't really working. They made mistakes. They either over or under helped, especially off of 3-point shooters on some of the key plays of the game. It was really didn't like what I saw from Denver's defense. They actually have now Denver has now lost 3 straight home games. But given the stakes, I mean, I don't know, maybe Nikola Jokic doesn't care. I care. I'd like to see him in this tournament because I'm going to be covering it closely. Disappointing for Denver.
Particularly because of how it happened. And Denver, a team that has won a championship, a team that has played a lot of high-level games, they made a number of surprising mistakes in the late stretch. I mean, there were plenty throughout, but in the late stretch, they had a number of different late turnovers, and they were, like bad passes. Like Jokic doesn't do many of those, but he had one that was like a pass to no one. And Jamal Murray had a weird travel off of an offensive rebound where he just kind of lost himself, and then he just tried to throw the ball off the ground. That didn't work. And they compounded the offensive mistakes with, as you said, over and under helping. And I think the focal point for that was Devin Vassell. So Devin Vassell has been in this game absolutely molten from 3. He's going into the final stretch of the game. I believe he was 5 of 7. And on 2 key plays late, the Denver Nuggets just don't guard him from 3. One of which was a real ridiculous overhelp. And then the other was I would call it an under recover. I believe it was Tim Hardaway Jr., who's just like, you don't have anything else to do. There's only one guy on the Spurs who's like, and especially because of how hot Devin Vassell was. And so they're just the shots he was making, like he makes a huge 3. He makes 2 of them within 30 seconds. So one of them takes a tie to a 3-point lead. Jamal Murray misses the floater and then does that travel. Next trip down, that's the one where Vassell, where I thought Tim Hardaway Jr., I believe it was him, under-helped. And so he gets these 2 threes that were just in the flow. They weren't anything. They weren't like, oh, Matt, Devin Vassell is taking such hard
so
shots.
Cornette actually assisted both of those.
Right.
And one, they just gave it to Cornette at the elbow, and nothing much was really happening. This is the second one. And I don't know what Hardaway Jr. was doing. Maybe there was like some back screen action or something he was like kind of worried about behind. But yeah, he just leaves Vassell wide open. It's just a straight pass by Cornette. The other one was a little bit more difficult where they ended up blitzing De'Aaron Fox with Jokic, and then Cornette was on the short roll. But still, are you like so worried about Cornette just like going downhill for a dunk, making the play? I thought it was a good decision to blitz it maybe, but yeah, they just gave up a lot of threes, and those two by Vassell were killers. I mean, the second half for the Nuggets, let's take maybe you can pull this in a second. Their turnovers and the number of fouls they committed in the second half, because both of those numbers I think were just astronomical. Because like I said, a minute into the half, they led it by 18 and seemed totally in control. But while you're looking at that, a couple other things that stood out. De'Aaron Fox, it wasn't his best game. He did have 12 assists, 8 of them for threes. Spurs, every single one of their threes, their 17 threes that they made on 43 attempts were assisted, which again shows you they were moving the ball pretty well. And they had 30 assists on 46 field goals overall. I thought there were moments, though, where Fox just wasn't really that great getting to the rim. One that stood out to me was early in the fourth with Valanciunas on the floor, semi-transition. Fox is throwing the ball on the right wing. It might have been after an offensive rebound. And Valanciunas is rumbling out there towards him. Fox kind of doesn't really have his feet set and just kind of chucks up a three, turning his body as he does so, when he could have just blown by Valanciunas for a layup. And he was just taking a lot of kind of contested shots. He was 6 of 19. Everyone else was doing well, and he certainly was drawing plenty of help. The other guy who stood out to me was Julian Champagnie, because he was able to get to the foul line for 10 attempts. He got fouled, I think, on 3 3-point, maybe it was even 4 3-pointers. And he was taking Duncan Robinson level of shots. They're running way more stuff for him, handoffs. He had license to just pull it. It wasn't just making open threes. He's like on the move, jacking these shots up. The guy sprinting behind him, running into him from behind, fouling him. I was very impressed by just the quality, or not even the quality, but the quantity of threes he's getting up on his way to 25 points.
Nate, your instinct on this was pretty starkly correct. The second half stats. So Denver, the turnover deficit was 11-3, and the points off of turnovers was 23-2 just in the second half. And then Denver committed 17 fouls just in the second half. Their starting 5 committed 14 fouls just in the second half. Murray had 4. Yeah. Jokic had 4. Peyton Watson had 3. Yeah, it's wild.
So, and that's 11 turnovers to 5 in the first half for Denver, and 17 fouls to 5 in the first half. So they played so well in the first half. They held San Antonio to 18 points in the second. And then, they gave up 80 points in the second half. I mean, Denver, you would hope that 136 offensive rating for Denver would be enough to win. And it was not.
And something else that it was interesting, and that there are some parallels, except that one of these players is far better defensively than the other, that San Antonio's offense seems to flow a lot better without Victor Wembanyama. And that isn't to say that he's a bad player on that end, but it's just because it has to be more egalitarian because there isn't a big mouth to feed. And so I thought that their ball movement seemed a little bit better. And so I mentioned those like Paolo, like the Magic offense flows better without Paolo Banchero. That does not mean those players are bad or anything else like that. And of course, I'm narrowing it to one side of the ball with Wembanyama because he, of course, makes them way better. But it did seem like their offense, helped by Denver's defense sucking, was looking more healthy than I'd seen in a while.
Yeah, actually, if you mind, can you pull up Seth's email on the clutch? The clutch stats. I haven't had a chance to look at that yet, but Denver has really been struggling in the clutch, and this one they struggled again, which you don't expect. The Murray Jokic pick and roll is going to be so incredibly deadly. Now they did win that Rockets game, but that was one of their only clutch wins this season.
Before tonight, so this doesn't get tonight. Denver was 2-5 in clutch games and had the biggest below win expectancy in the entire NBA, negative 2.4 wins below expected.
Yeah, and they've had a lot of fall from ahead ones, right? Because Seth's stats, those account for where you are when you enter clutch time as well. If you're up 5 during entering the clutch, that means that you have a much better win expectancy than if you're down 5 when you enter the clutch. So, yeah, and they're not going to add to it here. They did go to the Murray Jokic pick and roll quite a bit. Spurs were trying to switch that. They were trying to keep Luke Cornett out of the play on the baseline, guarding Peyton Watson. Watson had a big 3 that could have tied it in the last minute and missed. It was kind of difficult footwork. He was backing up, but he kind of didn't really know exactly where to be. He also missed a layup around the rim. It was a good contest by Champagne. That's the other thing I like about Champagne is he's, for this type of shooter that he is, he's a pretty solid defender. So he made a great rim protection play on Watson, but that's a play that Aaron Gordon is going to make. Watson, for the fact that he's been making all these corner threes lately, he still is just not the cutter or finisher, despite the fact that he can really jump, that Aaron Gordon is, to give Jokic that option along the baseline. And so he can struggle at times to find out where he's going to be. Generally, it seems like the corner has been the best place for him recently. But on a night when Jamal Murray goes absolutely crazy, 5 of 8 from 3, the Spurs start switching everything. Jokic really was pretty uninvolved again, only took 10 field goal attempts, had 10 assists, but was 1 rebound short of a good game. I guess the other thing we could talk about too is Cam Johnson. They did actually run more stuff through than they ever have. A lot of it actually at the start of the 4th. Didn't go great for the Nuggets overall during that period, but I thought he was getting pretty good shots coming out of the corner off of Valanciunas. He had 28 points, 10 of 16 from the field, 3 of 9 from 3. So the Nuggets seemed like they're mostly getting pretty good shots. It looked a little bit better when Watson was kind of hanging out in the dunker spot. The Spurs were overloading and just leaving Johnson in the corner. Then they stopped doing that and making Watson beat them, and he wasn't able to do it down the very end as San Antonio was just hitting a ton of threes. And of course, it was Vassell who had those back-to-back threes to push it to 6 and basically end the game in the last 2 minutes. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of Denver. I mean, this is the 3rd full game of Denver that I've done in the last week and a half. Do you have any observations on them overall at this point in time?
It was jarring to see another game where Jokic just didn't take that many shots from the field. That was also the case in the Memphis game. And I thought he was, we did that game for the strategy stream. I thought he was the best player on the floor, but it is just unusual to see that. I mean, but this wasn't an offensive loss for the Denver Nuggets. They had a 136 offensive rating. And
no, I would honestly say my biggest concern right now about Denver is Jokic's defense. And yes, I've been quite the negative Nancy on that over the years. They did win a championship. I was wrong that they couldn't win a championship with him because of his defense. But I think it is still worth noting that they didn't really play anyone in that 23 season. And he also was just a lot better at that point. And they had, I still think, better guys around him than they do even now. They might have their best offensive group that they've ever had around him once Gordon comes back, especially with his shooting. But they're missing probably their 2 best defensive players right now. That should be noted. But I do think that Jokic is he does not have a lot of energy on the defensive end. Will he be able to bring that for an entire playoff series? Maybe he is. And he still is a good defensive rebounder. He gets his hand on balls. Like he usually looks worse than he actually is in total. But I think even going back to the summer, like he had some struggles with Serbia defensively too. That's not looking great. Bruce Brown is kind of, back end rotation guy at this point to me. Like he was 1 of 6 on 2s in this one. Just doesn't have the same level of aggressiveness pushing it in transition. I think it's pretty notable that they're not starting him even in the absence of Christian Braun, and that it's Spencer Jones said. You like that Spencer Jones dunk, by the way? You see that one?
I don't think I did.
Oh man, you got to go back and watch that. He got a pass from Jokic as he was kind of hiding along the baseline and popped up off the ground and just crammed it with one hand on somebody. I was like, whoa, okay. I didn't know he had this. I thought he was like kind of this like muscle bound, ground bound guy. Also interesting that Spencer Jones took 9 shots. So he was not, he was not flare screen Jones in this one.
He had one corner 3 that didn't look fantastic. I do really like Spencer Jones, but
he probably needs to fix that form a little bit. I don't know how. I don't know if I could keep watching it.
it's pretty tough to watch. But yeah, I mean the Nuggets, and it's a challenge with Bruce Brown because he's been gone for 2 years, and so he's like, oh, well, he's back. Yeah, but it's just like in certain ways when a player comes back from an injury, and you're like, well, it's not necessarily the injury, it's the passage of time since the last time. And so for Bruce Brown, I
Well, in
mean,
his case, it's both, right? He had that injury at the start of last year.
that's true. And so it's but Bruce Brown now he's 29, and so like especially for a guy who his athleticism and energy is an important part of what Bruce Brown brings to the table. Like if you lose a half a step, a quarter of a step, like that's going to make your game a lot less dynamic. And I think that's been part of it. I thought that the other thing that's impressive about Mitch Johnson and the Spurs is that I'm not saying that their young guys set the world on fire, but they like didn't set their team on fire. I thought Harper played reasonably well. I thought that
Harper was great, man. I love watching that guy. He's one of my
fun.
favorite watches in the league.
I thought Carter Bryant was totally fine. Like he's works hard defensively. He did make a 3, which he doesn't always do, but like
yeah,
he defined. I mean,
they played him for 6 minutes. I think he played all in the second half, if memory serves. And they put him on Jokic. He competed. It made some of his catches hard. Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. Jokic was really. His body language is kind of interesting in this. Like he kind of did the Draymond Green fight the guy on the baseline out of bounds like he was doing with Şengün in last year's playoffs. And like the referees had to separate them. And he was doing a bunch of other stuff where he's just sort of bullying into guys, like being an irritant. And like, just like, I don't think Nikola Jokic is not, when he gets frustrated and he's kind of just like being an asshole out there, I don't think he plays as well. I think he's added more and more tricks as time has gone on, but it was a little bit of an odd performance from him. And also worth noting, this wasn't one of those, they dominated the Jokic minutes. He was actually -6.
Right. So this ties in with something that I think is really fascinating about when I was talking about the passage of time between this and the quarterfinals. It's a week and a half. There's a chance that San Antonio gets one or both of Stephon Castle and Victor Wembanyama back.
Please so let that happen.
Especially
if you're going to take away, you can take away Jokic for me. Please put Wembanyama back in the NBA Cup.
And so we will have to see. We'll have to see on that. Do you have anything else on this game?
No, let's talk about a little bit about OKC Phoenix. As it turned out, both these teams were going to make it regardless. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was brilliant down the end, 15 points in the fourth, although 2 of those came on an intentional foul late, but he did at least make those. And yeah, both these teams were making awesome shots. Royce O'Neal had a bank 3, but it was Shai. He had 2 off the dribble, step back 3s right up top. And he also had a 3-point play as well in the last 5 minutes of the game. He was going up against his old Canadian teammate, Dylan Brooks, initially in the last 5 minutes. But they would just switch with basically anyone. So he had his choice of whoever the matchup was going to be, essentially. And he just torched O'Neal. You got Oso Guitarro on him at one point, too. So it was... and Jalen Williams was back. He played, but wasn't in there down the end because he's just making his season debuts. But they didn't need him. Shai was just awesome.
Shai was great. And this game also featured the season debut of Jalen Williams.
Yeah.
He played 29 minutes, was 3 of 12. I thought he moved well. He had an athletic dunk off an alley-oop from Cason Wallace, I believe it was. And so that was kind of on an improvised play. So I thought he looked, in the parts I watched, he looked fine physically, and he was active defensively, as the Thunder always are. They had 9 steals and forced 18 turnovers. But so that's important. J-Dub being back, the Thunder were 18-1 without him, and now they're 1-0 with him. But for me, and this has been true a lot this season, I was just incredibly impressed with the Suns' moxie. There were a number of times that the Thunder went up either 8 points or double digits, and the Suns just kept on battling back. And yeah, Royce O'Neal banked a 3 that was a little bit fortunate, but like they just kept on working on it. I like that. Jordan Knott put Gillespie. He after that Wolves game, a little bit after that, they're bringing him in as a starter now. They started him against the Kings a couple days ago, and then he started again against the Thunder today. And he's one of their, to me, he's not only one of their best players, particularly with Grayson Allen out, but it gives them another person who can attack when Devin Booker's either getting doubled or something else. And there were times when Dillon Brooks was hunting his shot a little bit too much. And I mean, at times because he's needed to this season with Jalen Green unavailable. But I really like having Gillespie out there. I think it gives the Suns another way to another capable person. And considering how much ball pressure the Thunder put on you, you just need another player who can occupy the ball, who can do things out there. And so I really like that decision from Ott to have Gillespie start.
Yeah, and also he went with Oso Iguodala for 22 minutes, and Iguodala got the close rather than Mark Williams. And interestingly, the Thunder really struggled to finish around the rim with Iguodala out there. And in general, they were just over 50% on shots at the rim this game. J-Dub. Really, I got to get back to my J-Dub, J-Will now that he's back. But J-Dub struggled 2 out of 6 in his return. But Iguodala was able to make some plays. At least they even would have him bring the ball up and then hand off to Booker to get into the offense so Booker wouldn't have to deal with the pressure. I thought Booker's passing actually was absolutely brilliant in the last 5 minutes of this game against all the pressure. He only got up 13 shots in this game and had 21 points because he got fouled a lot, but he played 38 minutes. The Suns were definitely going for it. And I just thought he was under control, composed. He's at the point now where he's seen most everything. He had one play where he was getting pressured up. He had made a pass to the roll man previously. They took that away, and then Dillon Brooks was able to sneak along the baseline. He sent it to Brooks, and then Brooks made a nice pass. So there are a lot of really nice passes by Devin Booker. Maybe not actual assists, but incisive passes against the Thunder defense in the last 5 minutes that enabled Phoenix to score pretty well down the end. Unfortunately, Dillon Brooks just had a lot of key shots that he just missed. He missed 5 shots in the last 5 minutes of the game, and some of them were pretty good looks too from 3. He had a chance at a big 3 that I think could have tied it in the last minute or so that he just missed, which must have been disappointing for him going up against his Canadian teammates Shea and Lou Dort.
The Suns were also able to keep the Thunder possession advantage to a minimum. It was they actually took more true shots than Thunder did. Part of that was because Isaiah Hartenstein was unavailable, so he didn't play. And then AJ Mitchell left. He got I think it was a contusion on his left knee. He only played a couple of minutes and then he went out. But the Thunder have enough guys. But Isaiah Hartenstein is extremely important for their identity. Jay Will is not the same as Hartenstein, and it forced them to change their starting lineup, but they were bringing J-Dub in anyway, so they were going to make a change in the first place.
Yeah, this is one. I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, to me, is probably the best closer in the game right now, in part because all the isolation stuff that teams do at the end of games, he's just doing that all game. So it's just not really a change for him in how he's getting his shots. And teams also have to dig deeper into their bag against him earlier in the game to stop him. So he's already seen all the tricks that they have. They can't just save something for the end of the game to throw at him necessarily. So, I mean, Phoenix, really nice play by them, especially on a night when OKC shot 46% from downtown to stay in it as long as they did. They actually won the possession game by 2 as well. 102 true shots to 100, which, as we've noted, few teams are doing against OKC these days. So Phoenix, they're a tough out. Like, it's really hard to blow them out. They don't beat themselves very much either, and they play hard. They definitely are under-talented compared to some of these teams, but I mean, I think they're starting to look like at least a solid play-in team going forward here.
And so hopefully everyone liked this game because we're going to run it back in the quarterfinals because the Thunder so it'll be the same 2 teams in the same location because it was Suns Thunder in OKC. It'll be that same thing again in about a week and a half. And then the other quarterfinal in the West is going to be Spurs at Lakers because the Lakers, so that game was later. The East games all started at the same time. The West games were split among timelines. When the Lakers game was concluding, it didn't matter if they beat the Mavericks or not. They were still going to be, unless they won by 1 billion points, which they weren't going to do. They were going to be the 2 seed but they did end up beating the Mavericks in the Nico Harrison revenge game, however we want to classify that. And so they are the 2 and the Spurs are the 3.
Yeah, how much did Phoenix end up winning the wild card by?
They actually, so Memphis finished 3-1 in their group, and Memphis beat the Clippers by 5. So they were 17 clear, which is a fair amount, but not a ridiculous amount.
Yeah, and the Wolves, if the Wolves hadn't blown that game to Phoenix down the end, they would be in this position right now. And that was basically the difference. They had a 8-point lead, in the last minute of the game and lost that game. So that's why we're not seeing the Minnesota Timberwolves in this position. So yeah, Lakers, Spurs would be awesome. And I think, OKC Spurs or OKC Lakers will be really good too in the semis. And East Magic, we'll talk at least a little bit about some of these quarterfinals games before they happen. But yeah, Magic and Heat, that'll be a rematch of an opening night game when the Magic won. We didn't actually know how good the Heat were at that point. And I think the Magic are now that we know kind of what the Heat are, that'll be fascinating. The Magic ability to defend one-on-one versus the Heat wanting to go one-on-one will be a remarkable matchup. And then Raptors Knicks too. Let's see if the Raptors are for real. It's good to get at least one of those kind of hungry young ingenues in there in the Raptors. We do have a little news to get to quickly since we're not going to come to you again until Monday. Most of it we've hit on here.
Stephen Curry suffered it was a contusion for sure. It was
a thigh contusion.
Thigh contusion. I believe that was taking a charge on Amen Thompson at the end of Warriors Rockets. And so
I think he heard it first on a screen, and then it got worse after taking a charge, which ultimately got overturned, adding insult to injury there.
So he's going to be out, looks like about a week. The Warriors might get reinforcements, though. Jonathan Kuminga could return Saturday against the Pelicans, and DeAnthony Melton will not play on Saturday versus the Pelicans, but he could make his season debut on the road trip that the Warriors are about to go on.
Yeah, I want to tell everyone, too, by the way, speaking of tomorrow, that I'm going to be on NBA TV a lot. I'm doing the halftime show of their first game. I should probably look up what that game is at this point. Is Boston playing? Yeah, Boston, Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Good game. That's at 2 Pacific, so I'll be on probably for the first time around 3. And then also at halftime of New Orleans Golden State, we'll be doing a longer show in between those 2 games. And then I'm also, this is going to be really fun day. I get to do all the highlight packages for all the games that is going to run all night on NBA TV. So,
that's awesome.
I've never done that before. It's going to be fun to give it a shot to be like a Sports Center anchor. That'll be cool.
I think both of us at least considered that one of our dreams growing up. I of course did. And we do something.
I was definitely doing like my Marv Albert imitation while I was playing Bulls versus Blazers in my basement on my 19-inch TV. Quickly, since you were there, we didn't get a chance to talk about it Wednesday because it was so late, but what did you think of Houston beating Golden State without KD and without Steven Adams and all their other injuries in that game?
The Rockets were still able to dominate the possession game. They got a ton of offensive rebounds. But I think for me, the big takeaway was Reed Sheppard. I thought he was great. And it wasn't just, at times his 3-pointer was going, but he did a lot of work inside the arc. He was, I think, something like 8 of 12 or 8 of 13 on twos.
Yeah.
So that worked out really well. Didn't turn the ball over a ton. And the Rockets they won the possession game not only through the offensive rebounds, but the Warriors had 16 turnovers, some of which were pretty egregious. And so the Rockets, I thought they almost shot poorly enough to lose, something they have done against the Golden State Warriors at other moments in the past, but they were able to win it. And the Warriors missed plenty of threes in response towards the end. But I cracked up because the very beginning of the game, Jimmy Butler hits 2 3-pointers. Those were the first 6 Warriors points. And I'm like, it's going to be one of those games. No, those are the only 2 3-pointers Jimmy Butler made the entire game. But It was so I thought that the Rockets outplayed the Warriors and they deserved the win and they got the win.
Yeah, this Reed Shepherd thing is looking pretty real, Danny, and particularly because look, who's guarding him a lot of the games? Stephen Curry is guarding him a lot. That's even without KD available. Now the Warriors don't have anybody to guard anybody on the perimeter. That's one of their big problems. And the fact that they're turning the ball over so much is like that was the thing. Like they got Jimmy. It's like all of a sudden our turnover issues are over. No, they're back with a vengeance this season, and so they're losing the possession game a lot. Their transition defense has been really bad as a result of that too. So yeah, they couldn't contain Shepherd. I mean, that mid-range jumper off the pick and roll, especially if he's running it with Şengün, you can't really switch that. And as well as he's played now, do you think is it actually possible that the Fred VanVleet injury was a blessing? Like we thought maybe it'd be possible, more really with respect to Amen than with Shepherd, but and Shepherd's going to keep shooting like this. I mean, as good as Fred VanVleet was on both ends, Shepherd never would have gotten this opportunity, you would think, with VanVleet available. I mean, sure, if you could say Shepherd would still be this guy, and you also get to throw VanVleet in there in the rotation to use however you want, sure, but he doesn't emerge like this if VanVleet's still around.
That's a really interesting point, and I think you might be right. We'll see where it goes, and they've been able to
withstand. Yeah, I mean
that
I'm guessing. I'm willing to change that if he starts to fall off, but
yeah.
I mean he's looking like a 20-point a game scorer if you give him the minutes.
Let's see where are the world.
But yeah, I didn't want to go. Sorry to cut you off there. I didn't want to go quite too far as like being on record of like, oh, it's clearly a good thing that VanVleet got hurt. I'm not there yet, but it's certainly interesting to think about at this point.
For the Washington Wizards, they got Keyshawn George back, but they got trucked by the Indiana Pacers. Congratulations, Pacers! You are 3-16. The Magic are 2-16. They're going to be without Corey Kispert for a little while. He has a fracture in I believe it's his right thumb. So he'll be out for
the tip of his right thumb though. So hopefully it won't be, it might be a couple weaker, hopefully.
And Will Riley played in the loss of the Pacers, but I don't know whether he only played in garbage time or whether he played during the competitive portion.
Well, no, you know what? It's not important enough to look at it. We'll figure that out later. Toronto, RJ Barrett, that's another possible return by the start of the NBA Cup with this right knee sprain. He's supposed to be reevaluated in 7 days from Wednesday, no structural damage. Grady Dick suffered a head injury against the Pacers on Wednesday, and so he may be out for a little bit, but again, could return by the NBA Cup. Grayson Allen was upgraded to doubtful, but didn't ultimately play against the Thunder, and they're still missing Ryan Dunn. Phoenix is with a wrist issue. Philly, VJ Edgecombe, they've been missing him a lot. He's still out with a calf injury, but you're not going to miss anybody going up against the Brooklyn Nets. They handled them very easily. And Trendon Watford suffered that groin injury, pushing the ball up floor. He's going to be reevaluated in 2 weeks from that. And Joel is out still. It seemed like maybe he was trending towards possibly being back, but now he's still on the shelf for 9 games with this knee soreness. There's been some moments where it seemed like maybe he's practicing, he's coming back, but not. I'm not going to say his return is imminent as of yet. We did mention this, I don't think, from the other day. Kenrich Williams has made his season debut for OKC, coming back from knee surgery in the preseason. They're still missing Aaron Wiggins with a groin issue. What else we got here?
A timeline for Landry Shamet. Unfortunately, it looks like he's going to be out at least 4 weeks with his shoulder injury. So that sucks for him. The Knicks were able to still make it into the quarters of the NBA Cup, and they'll have a decent chance of advancing further than that. The Pels are going to be without Herb Jones for at least 1 more week due to a mild calf strain on his right leg. And Karlo Matkovic has missed 5 straight with a calf strain as well. Zach Edey, we wondered, we covered their game for the strategy stream. He left after a few minutes due to a head issue, but that head issue was a migraine. But good news, he had that wild game where I think it was plus like 39 in an overtime win for the Grizz on Wednesday. Bogdan Bogdanovic is still dealing with a hip issue, so he didn't play in the Clippers lost to the Grizzlies, which didn't end up mattering for NBA Cup purposes.
Yeah. But it does matter for those teams' records. I do think it's somewhat notable that Edey has returned and now John Morant is out, and suddenly the Grizz actually are looking pretty respectable again.
Mm-hmm.
Jaime Jaquez is questionable for Saturday's game with a groin issue. Basically, every member of the Heat has had some sort of an issue with their hip or groin in the last week, but we'll see if he plays. Marcus Smart, did he end up not playing tonight against Dallas with the back spasms?
He did not play.
Yeah, but they did get DeAndre Ayton back from this knee contusion. He thought that was kind of scary, but ultimately was able to come back as they put up a 137 offensive rating against the Mavs tonight.
And Anthony Davis did return against his former team, played 28 minutes. I thought he didn't look great on offense, like in terms of like he wasn't as active in certain moments, but he did have a couple blocks which were more being in the right place and being big. But I think he looked better out there than I expected, considering the absence and that it seemed like he might want to rush back to play against the Lakers.
And unfortunately, Julian Strawther, we haven't mentioned him, but he hasn't been playing for Denver. He could have been getting some tick in theory with all the injuries they have on the perimeter, but he's had this back issue. He's been out for the last 2 weeks. Cleveland, Craig Porter Jr. was questionable with a hamstring issue, ended up not playing. Sam Merrill is still out with a hand issue as well. I think that they've missed him. And they did get Jarrett Allen back from his finger issue that he's kind of been in and out with after a 3-game absence. Did Nikola Vucevic play today?
He did. Vuce played as the Bulls lost to the Charlotte Hornets 123-116, but Isaac Okoro did not. He's dealing with a back issue and did not play.
Yeah, Bulls have definitely fallen back to earth. Critically, Ben Saraf is back from an ankle sprain. And more critically, Kristaps Porzingis is ruled out today after being questionable with an illness. I'm going to double check this right now. I believe this is the third illness in absence that Kristaps Porzingis has had. And I went to the wrong page, so I'm still looking for his game log. And yeah, it doesn't show me exactly why he missed this game, but this is the 5th game that he's missed. Some of it is not playing or 5th stint that he's missed, excuse me. Some of it has been not playing on the second night of back-to-backs, but I'm almost certain this is the 3rd separate time that he has missed time due to illness. And again, given the issue with the syndrome that he has, you have to wonder if like that's something that just pops up here and there. They claim that it's easy to manage, and I was a little skeptical of that when I read the article, and I'm more skeptical now that he's just missing time with illness. I don't know if anyone's actually asked him if this illness is the same thing, but obviously a little bit concerning. And Atlanta, if they're going to really make noise this year, they need him. It's got to be disruptive though to have him yo-yoing in and out of the lineup like this. All right, then we will be back on Monday. The plan is to select our awards now that it's December 1st. We'll talk to y'all then. Oh yeah, and I guess all the usual stuff. Give us a like and subscribe, please, on YouTube. Also going to be doing clutch calls from tonight. A couple of those are going to be coming out as well. I haven't heard from Dan because we've been recording, but I think the plan was to try to do real time the excitement of all 3 of those East games reaching a conclusion as we found out who the quarterfinalists were going to be. And yeah, we'll talk to y'all again on Monday. Till then.